I hope everybody's well and looking forward to the weekend, which is going to be it's Halloween. I don't know how it will be for you. I don't really know how it'll be for me, but I do always think of stories that have a little bit or a lot of Halloween story to them. This is a story that I've known for a very long time. And I remember so well when I learned it and told it in Texas 10 years ago at a festival down there. And so I had not done that particular show again. And then I started thinking, and it came into my mind, and I bet you won't really realize it. I've been making quilts. Now, I love to make with fabrics. And so I have lots of fabrics in big boxes that are heavy and whatever. So I've been messing around with my fabrics to see if I can unweigh my house. And it works. And when you're going along and just thinking, things come together. And that's what happened to give us this story. Some time ago, Jim and I went up to the mountains and we were walking around, we were hiking, we were looking. And one day we walked in and we looked at this small house. And I just thought about it. Who can this be in this house? And are there any stories that we could find out? Why not? Go ahead and ask him, he says. So I went up on the porch. You waited outside to be sure that all was good. And I walked up, and sitting on the porch were two old women. And I told them that there I was here in the mountains, and I just love the mountains and the sky and everything that's going along. But I really like your little house here. Are there any stories about this house? And they looked at each other like they knew something. And they didn't know, and I didn't get any big clues. But then they sort of coughed and looked at me and said, "Don't worry, my dear. We have a story. We have a story, and I'll tell you what it is. It's the story of Mavis. Yes, indeed, Mavis Estep. Mavis Estep. Oh, really? Yes, and sit down. Call your husband in. Tell him to come sit down beside you because it'll take a little time to tell it to you." I was really excited and I gave him the signal and he came quickly up, the walkway or pathway and came up on the table on the porch, thanked him, and then we sat down. Mavis Estep was born on a night of just storm and lightning and thunder and thunder and thunder and lightning and lightning. And after she got through with that, she was a baby. She was born that day. And after that, she had an idea in her head that she always had to be very safe and very careful so that she wouldn't be hurt when that happened. I'm telling you, do you remember that? I'm telling you. What about you, Sarah? Do you remember that? And yes, I do. And she was so careful about herself that if the weather started and it felt that, sort of dangerous to her, she wouldn't hold a needle. She wouldn't hold a pot that was metal. She wouldn't do anything, not anything that put her in the danger bucket. Her parents had to make her a wood wood purse, first of all the small one, and then as it got bigger, they got wooden, bigger bits. No metal in her room. They didn't touch it. They were careful. They helped her. They wanted to help her out. She was grown, she was smart. She was a sewer. She had, even as a young girl, once she got to being a good sewer, she started making things. And if there was the one thing that gave her any ideas that there was going to be lightning or anything fearful, she put away her ankle, her needles, and she put away her scissors, and she wouldn't touch them. And she warned everybody else in her house, leave them alone until the storm is gone. And they did that. They did. She did, well, clothes to wear and clothes to cut up and put on quilts. She believed that there was something that was important about using your own cloth and your own clothes in those quilts, that they left you a part of you. She wasn't old, she was young when she got married. Basil. Basil was a good looking young guy. They'd known each other since they were young, young, young. And when the time came and everything was good, they got married. They got married, and his family, his brothers and his father, stepped forward and built them a house. Not far from here, really, but they built them a house. And they moved in, and they seemed to be so happy. Oh my goodness, they were so happy until one night. It was about eight, 8 months that they'd been married, and they started to have a fight. Not a hitting fight, an argument fight. And it was deep. It was deep because Mavis came up and said, "We're going to church this week." And he said, "No, I'm not going." And that started the argument. And it got hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter. Well, he was certainly very obvious, not only with his ideas about what he was going to do, and he told her, "I'm not going and listen to him anymore. So you can count on it. I'm not going." Well, on that day, he had put on a wool shirt, a red wool shirt that his mom made for him so that he wouldn't get cold on a cold night or cold outside. And when the fight was over, she slipped the shirt away and she folded it tight and hid it. And he didn't know where it was. Mavis had done it. She hid it. She didn't take it back out. She waited for a long time. And then she cut it up. She cut it like you have to do for a quilt. She cut it and made little squares, little red squares to be part of the quilt. And she's worked on it and worked on it so that he would never see it until it was done. And when it was done, what they found out was it was the warmest, warmest thing that you could wrap yourself up in the winter up in those hills. That was the good part of it. And so they had to keep it. Mavis had to keep it hidden until it got good and cold, and then she pulled it out. They had many children. The children were good children, and they did a fine job with raising those children. They had education as close as they could get to it, and they went on and they were doing things within the world, just like you should, you know. And they got married, and they had their own children start in their homes. And she had continued to make her quilts and clothes for the children to wear, whether they were her children or their children. She kept sewing. That's what she liked, except if there was the sign of anything that looked like lightning. That was too much. She could not do that. And it went on, and they were a happy couple, a happy family. And then Mavis got sick. Mavis got very sick. And she knew that she wasn't going to get well. So she asked him to come in and sit with her. And he did. And then she died. She died. And before she died, they sat together. And he said, I have some favors. I have some favors, husband, to ask of you. I want our children to have all those quilts. All right, you can have those quilts. All right. And when you get married, just don't bring a metal bed in this house. Somebody will be hurt by lightning. I'll never do that. Well, I think that you will, she said, my darling, and it will be all right as long as you do those two things. Would it surprise you if I told you that the story is that within 6 months, he stepped aside and he picked up another woman, a youngish woman, a large youngest woman who would really warm you well in the winter. The old man could have that and warm up. And he did it. And then the one thing that she wanted was a metal bed. And he listened to her and he didn't say no. And he said yes. And he got a metal bed. And the next thing he knew is he had it. And what do you think she did? Just what do you think she did? She picked up the quilt made of the red pieces backed with her wedding dress. That was the back. And in the front was a design with those little red pieces. And she must have known that that could have been the thing that would happen. And it kept them warm. They knew that it was going to keep them warm. They brought in the bed, they put in this thing. It was wonderful. And they were there. They were there. And she cried. She cried and she came up. And that night they looked at her at the bottom of the bed. And there was a woman standing there in a white dress. And they knew that something was going to happen. And then out of nowhere, whack! Lightning. Lightning hit it. Lightning hit it. And that metal bed just burned the holes in the floor and the bed dropped down. When they came back, people came back to see how things were with these people. There was no bed. There was nothing. And they started looking around and they found Basil, but not the woman. She had been knocked out of the bed and she was still alive and she could still make words. And they looked at him and he had been cooked on the top of that bed. No more about him. None. Well, the next day they looked around and her brother came in there and looked around, and it was so cold he picked up a quilt and he wrapped himself up in it. And his father, who was very smart, looked and said, "Get off that quilt. That's Mavis's daughter's quilts, not yours." And he dropped it and folded it and put it back in the corner where it had been. Now, I'll tell you when I finish the story, we all talked about it. Where could that have come? There was no idea of where that came from. We didn't have the sound of lightning or thunder. It just happened. It just happened. And he was gone. And we didn't talk about it other than what do you think might have happened? What do you think might have happened? And then we realized that most of us knew. We had thought about it. We knew Mavis. We knew her well. She was such a fine and wonderful woman who loved him desperately and who expected him to follow through with his promises about no metals and maybe not even getting married. We knew it. We just said it or made a sign to each other. Mavis killed him. That's just how it was to settle that. And now she was a ghost. Well, there it is. I love the story from those women. Would never have thought about it. Maybe. Come back again, I hope.